Hello, I'm Shannon Tiesi from the Diplomat, and I'm here today at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, where I'm happy to be joined by Jim Schoff. Mr. Schoff is a Senior Fellow for Foreign Policy here at the Carnegie Endowment. Thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
Today we're going to be talking about Japan's foreign policy under Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. Prime Minister Abe has been very active in the foreign policy realm, but sometimes it's his domestic policy that is really driving foreign policy relationships, especially in the immediate neighborhood. So, Jim, how would you describe some of Abe's domestic policies, particularly his changes to the way Japan interprets its defense posture? How is that driving his relationships in the immediate region?
Right. Well, Prime Minister Abe's one of his main priorities is the fact that he believes Japan is now at a disadvantage in terms of the security environment in East Asia, primarily because of large increases in military spending by China over the last decade and a half or so, in the 9–10% range annually, whereas Japan's defense spending has only increased about a couple of percent over 10 years. Also, North Korea's development of nuclear tipped missiles, maybe not right now, but pretty soon in the near future, has put Japan more on the front lines of security. So he's looking to free up the legal restrictions and kind of boost Japan's capability in the security area, in the military area, to cooperate with other countries, primarily the United States. So that's part of what's driving this domestic change to different security policies and that then have an effect broader on the region.
So do you think that Abe wants to have defense relations, military-to-military relations, as a major pillar of some of his foreign policy relationships with other countries in the region? Obviously, that's a major part of Japan-U.S. relations, but we've also seen outreach on more of the military side with countries like Vietnam in a way that wouldn't have been possible before the reinterpretation of Japan's constitution.
It's important to remember that Prime Minister Abe and Japan's moves and changes on the security front are still rather modest. They're big for Japan historically because it has always hid behind its pacifist constitution and Article 9 that says it can't have war potential. But Abe is trying to go beyond that by increasing some spending, increasing cooperation with the United States, for example, a new cabinet decision to allow it to participate in some collective self-defense situations in the region, and expanding outreach to countries, as you say, like Vietnam, also the Philippines, which notably have territorial disputes with China, and also defense equipment or defense industry cooperation with countries like Great Britain, Australia, and France. But these are still relatively modest adjustments, mostly in response to the changes that I mentioned before in terms of China and North Korea. But it should give it a little bit more of a closer partnership or capability, and particularly with the United States. There's great concern about the Senkaku Islands in the East China Sea that China also claims that Japan administers, and we've seen a lot of tension in that area. So this is all to try to boost deterrence, boost capability, because rather than just have a military that's there for deterrence purposes, Japan is now realizing it might actually have to use its military in a limited way in some kind of limited conflict, but that's a very new concept for Japan. So it's beginning to come to grips with that, and in part by multilateralizing or expanding its relationships out of the inner circle of East Asia, where relations have been relatively poor lately.
So Japan looks at China and sees a growing threat, especially in the military field. But China looks at Japan's recent moves in the defense sector and sees that as a threat, a direct threat to Beijing. And they've talked a lot about Abe as returning to pre-World War II militarism. Given all of this background, what do you make of some of the more recent signs that maybe Beijing and Tokyo are actually trying to smooth tensions and return to a more normal relationship?
Right. Well, there's a great debate right now about how seriously Beijing is worried about Japan and its remilitarization. Japan really does not pose any threat to China. All it does is actually all it's doing is improving its capability to defend itself against what Japan considers to be aggressive maritime tactics, which China is also pursuing in other parts of the South China Sea. So is it really fearful of these changes that are going on in Japan, or is it kind of using this, these changes to bring up the ghosts and the memories of World War II, which Abe has not made very easy on himself by emphasizing elements of historical revisionism as well. So he's kind of made that situation worse. So we do have this tension. There definitely is an effort to try to improve the Japan-China relationship. It has gotten steadily worse since 2012 over this territorial dispute. And Abe is getting ready to go to Beijing in November for the APEC summit. And we'll probably have some sort of summit meeting with Chinese President Xi Jinping. But I think the expectations are still relatively modest for how this is going to carry over. They may make some modest adjustments or announcements in terms of restarting parliamentary exchanges and maybe some kind of conflict avoidance mechanisms in the East China Sea, possibly even some cooperation on China's proposal for an Asian investment infrastructure bank, Infrastructure Investment Bank. But I think the expectations are still low for real long-term reconciliation, because China's two key demands are that Japan accept that there's a dispute over the Senkaku Islands, and that Prime Minister Abe refrain from ever visiting the Yasukuni Shrine again, which gets back to this history issue, neither of which Japan is in a position to compromise on in the near term.
Mm. We see some similar themes in Japan's relationship with South Korea, especially the historical concerns, the perception that Abe is not being sensitive enough to the victimization of other Asian people, both in South Korea, in China, and elsewhere. But at the same time, Japan and South Korea are both strong U.S. allies, and there is a temptation for them to align together with the U.S., not necessarily against China, but as a way of deterring China. So how can Japan and South Korea balance, on one hand, these historical tensions, and on the other hand, their modern-day shared interests to reach a sort of functional relationship?
Right, the Japan-South Korea relationship is particularly troubling for the United States because of those alliance relationships and because of the common threat that we face from North Korea. But I see a slightly different problem than the Japan-China problem. The Japan-China problem has fundamental structural problems. As China rises, it is seeking, I think, a fundamentally different regional order where China is more, what it views as more properly in the center and has greater sway over how a variety of rules and norms are formed and evolve in the region. That same larger kind of titanic struggle about the future of Asia is not a part of the Japan-South Korea relationship. It's more about South Korea feeling, I think, much better about itself. It's a stronger economy, it's an accomplished democracy, and it's beginning to play a wider role in the world. And it wants a different type of respect and a different type of relationship with Japan than it had originally negotiated in their normalization treaty of 1965. In a way, they want to renegotiate the terms of the reconciliation between Japan and South Korea, whereas Japan says, no, that deal has been done, and it gets to this point on comfort women and from the occupation of the colonization of Korea by Japan back in the early 1900s up through World War II. And they're now at a fundamental kind of political impasse where the historical narrative in South Korea is at odds with where Japan is at in terms of how much coercion, how much force was used by the military during the war, World War II, in forcibly bringing Korean women to be prostitutes in brothels during the war. And there's kind of a fundamental disagreement about how significant that role was. And to a point, it's raised up to the leaders of both countries where they cannot easily say, well, actually, I've changed my mind in terms of how I view that. So it's awfully difficult politically right now for either of them to step down from those positions. So it's not a structural problem, but it's a political problem, and unless the threat from North Korea or some other forcing factor increases in the near future, I actually don't see great prospects for much warmer Japan-South Korea ties in the near future. Right now, neither are so threatened that they need to force that common interest. Hopefully they can keep economic relations warm and keep moving at lower levels. But high-level reconciliation is still a little ways away, I think.
And of course, the North Korea factor is especially interesting right now because we've seen some rather unusual outreach between Tokyo and Pyongyang. You've seen a potential deal where North Korea will seriously investigate the issue of abducted Japanese citizens in return for possible easing of sanctions from Japan. Do you think that this arrangement is going to have any actual long-term impact on the Japan-North Korea relationship, or is it just sort of all talk?
Unfortunately, I think it's mostly talk. Prime Minister Abe was hoping, I think, to diversify relationships in the region. He's got trouble with China, trouble with South Korea. He hasn't been able to meet the leaders of those two countries in a meaningful way. He was reaching out to Russia and making some progress there, and then Russia's annexation of Crimea and the fallout with the West has crimped his style there. And so in addition to strong outreach in Southeast Asia diplomatically and to India and other places, he was hoping that maybe he could become more relevant on the North Korea front by working this deal, and has been pursuing it ever since he came into office in early 2013 with emissaries, secret emissaries to Pyongyang to try to figure out if a deal could be done. North Korea is saying enough nice things to string Abe along, I think, and it's worth Abe pursuing this, but deep down, I don't think North Korea is going to come through with enough to make it politically acceptable for the Japanese to go any further. So I have high confidence in North Korea's ability to disappoint in this regard.
And you also mentioned Russia and Abe's outreach to Russia. In the wake of the Crimea and the Ukraine crisis and the NATO sanctions and the way that the U.S., especially relationship with Russia, has gone downhill, do you see any potential for Abe to independently pursue better ties with Russia and Putin at this point?
I think there is some potential there. Abe has to walk a fine line. On the one hand, he wants to avoid upsetting the United States and be a responsible member of the G7, which is applying sanctions vis-a-vis Russia. And they're doing that. He also needs to really put his foot down on the Crimea situation, because Tokyo recognizes the precedent that sets. And they, in their language, they've talked about change of the status quo by force. And we cannot accept change of the status quo by force in terms of territorial issues, because that links all the way back to China and the Senkaku situation. So they want to make sure they're very firm on that international precedent and that they stand on the right side there, so that if China ever tried to just kind of step in and occupy the Senkakus and present a fait accompli, they would have that international moral support and legal support in that regard. But with that, I think Japan can be tough on the Crimea question, but still then reach out to Russia on a variety of other issues, whether it's energy cooperation, whether it's other kinds of economic cooperation in the region. So I think the United States would understand to some extent Russia is an immediate neighbor of Japan. As long as they're holding firm on the Crimea situation, and the United States is looking to find ways to cooperate with Russia as well on issues in the Middle East, and where there is common interest, I think there should be an opportunity for Abe to improve relations with Moscow.
Thank you so much for joining us today. Unfortunately, that's all the time that we have. But thank you for tuning in. Once again, I'm Shannon Tiesi from The Diplomat.